What's going on, guys? Hope you guys are doing good. This is a camera not a lot of people talk about, but it's a camera that I think might be my second favorite out of all the ones that I've used, and it's a camera that I've been using for about a year and a half pretty consistently, so I've got a lot of experience with it. And what I'm talking about is the Canon SL2. Now in this video we're going to go over how I set mine up, the little case that I have, the little kit that I have, and I'm going to go over the pros and cons, and we're going to compare the image of the SL2 to the Canon T3i because I got a comment asking about that too. And I think they're really similar images, to be honest with you. It's really easy for me to match from the two cameras. But first, let me show you guys my kit. So this is kind of my camera case right here. This is what I carried my M50 in. That's why it says M50. This is what I carried my M50 in when I was doing a lot of real estate photography. And what I have found is these are way cheaper than most camera bags, and I can leave it in my car. If stuff gets stacked on top of it, it's not a big deal. And so when I sold my M50 kit, I kept the carrying case. And when I picked up this SL2 body right here, I just set everything up like this. And this is what I use for my main camera for my other channel. So what I've done is I've got a little spot that I think 5 batteries will fit. I've only got one spare one. The charger's right there. The SL2 body goes in here. Got a little Swiss Arca plate on there. I'll show you this camera in depth in just a second because it is a pretty crusty one. That's why I have it, because it was so cheap. And then the lens that I use the most on my other channel is the 10-18 with an ND filter on there. I just leave it on there. And then a little shotgun mic, the Deity D4 Duo. Not the best mic, but it works pretty good, and they're pretty cheap. It works good. This setup works good. Okay, this is just a standard Canon SL2. I've added a little wrist strap, but I like this little wrist strap because it was cheap and it comes with a quick disconnect. But when I got this one, the first thing that I seen was that the port covers were off, and then it looked like somebody tried to scrape the coating off of the back of the LCD screen. When it came in, I was a little bit scared because I didn't know if this thing was going to be a turd or not, but the shutter count was pretty low, and I think somebody just used it and abused it a little bit. But the LCD was in good shape. I put a screen protector on there. The viewfinder works great, and the rest of the camera is not that beat up. This is what the top of the SL2 looks like. You have your shutter dial there, you have your shutter button there, ISO, and then your display, then your on switch. So when you turn your on switch on one, it turns it into photo mode. Then when you go one more, it turns it into video mode. I like that a lot. I like that I can just know if I go all the way to the left, it's on video mode. Then you have your mode selection dial, cold shoe, a Wi-Fi button up here. On the back of the camera, you have your menu button right here, your info, your AV button there, your on-off for your shooting, play button, trash, and then you have your selection dial there. This camera has a pretty simple layout, and I kind of appreciate it. But like I said, the lens that I use the most is the Canon 10-18 on my other channel. I need a lens that has autofocus and that I can also get really close to because I like to run a shotgun mic. So this is something I left out of the pros and cons, but one of the things that I hate about this is where that mic cable goes in. It makes it easy to hit with the LCD screen. It's not quite as bad as the M50, but it is so bad that I'm worried about knocking this little mic port loose on this camera. But anyway, moving on. Let's switch over to the SL2 now, and we'll go over the pros and cons of this camera. Okay, this is what the image looks like with that setup. With the wide angle lens, it does make my head look a little bit bigger, makes my face look a little bit longer. It makes my hands look a little bit weird on the outside of the frame, but I am really close to the camera. I'm less than arm's distance. And for my other channel, I use that a lot because I do product videos. So just to show you what I mean, if I were talking about this camera right here, the one you guys just saw me on, the T3i, I can hold that up right there, and it gives a nice little product shot with that wide angle lens. Let's talk about the pros with this camera really quick. Number one, the 1080, it only shoots 1080, but the 1080 looks really good in my opinion. I'm not one of those 4K guys. I honestly don't have a computer that can handle the file sizes of 4K. And with the SL2, you get 24 frames per second, you get 30 frames per second, and you also get 60 frames per second. You also have the ability to change the file size. You have a standard file size, which is a higher bit rate, and then you have a light bit rate, which makes really small file sizes. And I actually use that a lot on my other channel. Some of my individual clips on that channel can be 25 minutes sometimes. So I use that light file size quite a bit on that channel. I was kind of having fun shooting with that 50mm lens and the Godox wireless mic. So let's switch over to that, and I'll go over the rest of the pros with this camera. So pro number 2, other than this thing having dual pixel autofocus, I forgot to mention that up until this point, that's a big pro with this camera, is dual pixel autofocus. T3i does not have that. It's super nice when you have, it's a lot easier to record yourself with dual pixel autofocus. But pro number 2, this thing is a workhorse. This thing is a really easy camera to use. It's a really easy camera to set up. It works great. I've never had one malfunction, even this crusty thing. Where I live, it gets really hot in the summertime, and all of my videos are outdoors mostly. It's a big deal when cameras start to overheat, and I've never had a Canon SL2 even offer to overheat. The T3i with Magic Lantern firmware was overheating just in the beginning of this video. So pro number 1 is the great 1080 footage. Pro number 2 is this thing is a workhorse. Pro number 3, this is a low bench. Hopefully that looks good. Camera is a long ways off. Pro number 3 is this thing is super affordable. If you're on a budget like me, the table's got bird shit all over it. If you're on a budget like I am, a $200 camera that performs this well is a big deal. I love my T3i, but I honestly don't think that I would recommend the T3i to everybody. For about $70 more on average, you can pick up an SL2 that has 60 frames per second and dual pixel autofocus. It's a great camera, especially for the cost. Pro number 3 would have to be that this thing is so affordable. But there's always some cons. There's cons with everything. The perfect camera probably doesn't exist, and if it does, I can't afford it. But con number 1, there's no stabilization with this camera. There's no electronic stabilization. There's no stabilization of the sensor. There's no stabilization inside the body of this camera. It does not exist. Now, personally, I don't need it. I think it's overrated. You can get a lens. You can get the EFS 10-18. It's got just enough stabilization to not make it look awful. Most of my shots are tripod mounted, or I'm using something like a fluid head to get my B-roll shots. I don't really need the stabilization other than the lens stabilization. So not that big of a deal, but it does not have it. There is no way to get it. Con number 2, and I think this is probably could just be solved with a firmware upgrade Canon, but there's no focus peaking. Now, focus peaking is not something that you typically see on DSLRs, but Canon put focus peaking inside of the SL3, which was the step up from this camera, which I owned and didn't like as much as the SL2, mostly because of the 24 frames per second in 1080. The SL3 doesn't have it. But back to focus peaking. I wish they would just put focus peaking in this camera. I think it's an awesome setup. I honestly wish they would start making these again upgraded. I think it would be a big hit, but I'm also weird. I'm shooting with a T3i, so that's probably wrong. Let's move on. No focus peaking. Con number 3, I know I said this thing was a workhorse. I didn't have really many complaints with it, but there is one big one, and that battery grips for this thing do not exist. And most people don't like battery grips. Most people don't use battery grips. But going back to those longer shooting periods, it's not the best for long battery life. And the Canon batteries, the stock ones from Canon, are pretty expensive. So I can pretty much only use the third-party batteries. They don't last that long. I wish there was a battery grip. This thing does eat batteries. I probably need to get more than 2, but that's the last con. The fact that there is no battery grip and the fact that the battery life is not great. So if you're looking for a budget camera for YouTube, don't forget about the Canon SL2. It's not a super popular camera. If you need 4K, this one's not for you. But if you need something that's going to be able to give you good 1080, decent preamps, easy to use camera, and you're on a budget, check out the Canon SL2. And all of the B-roll of the SL2 was shot on a T3i with the 10-18. I'm about to shoot the B-roll. So that'll give you a good comparison of the image between the two. Now, I can't turn the digital sharpening off of the SL2, so there's going to be a little bit sharper of a contrast. It's a 24 megapixel sensor. This is an 18 megapixel sensor, but it's a really similar image in my opinion. But that's it for this video. I hope you guys are doing good. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll see you later.